This video is an overview of the political system of the United Kingdom. And as you can see here from the overview, it's a parliamentary system, and this is a classic parliamentary steering chain. The people elects the members of the legislature in at least one chamber. The legislature elects the executive. The executive remains in office as long as it has the confidence of the legislature and runs the administration, which provides services and output to the people, as it were. So let's go through these and what makes what the characteristics of the system of the United Kingdom really are. So first of all, we can really talk about this system, the system of the United Kingdom, as an incubator, if not the originator of liberal democracy, then definitely an incubator of it. A lot of the Enlightenment thinkers that produced philosophies, that created the philosophies around democracy that have informed illiberal democracy came from the United Kingdom. John Locke, for instance, and the development of the institutions that make up the political system has occurred over a very long period of time, several centuries, where these institutions, the House of Commons, the role of the executive, have developed to their present state. It's also a unitary political system, so sovereignty rests with the national level of government. And this is the start of the Westminster model, which is hardly strange. The Westminster name should be a clue there. This is the Westminster model of parliamentarism. So there's fusion of powers and legislative sovereignty, parliamentary supremacy. These are two words that describe the system. And this really means that sovereignty rests with the legislature, and that the fusion of powers means that the Prime Minister, the government, the executive cannot remain in office without the confidence of the House of Commons. And this is really important for the dynamic between these two. So what happens here is that if the Prime Minister loses the confidence of the House of Commons, the executive falls. And that has consequences because it means that the members of Parliament have to stay loyal to the party. They have to toe the party line, because if they vote against their government, the government coming out of their caucus, then they lose power and someone else takes over. So because of this rigging, because of how this dynamic is created, an individual member of parliament has a much greater degree of pressure to toe the party line in the United Kingdom than their colleagues in the American Congress has. But before we get to the details of the legislature and the executive, let's have a look at the Constitution, because it's really kind of interesting and unique. This is in fact a unwritten constitution to the large part. There is no constitution American style, or even French style, or German style, or Japanese style. It's a very unique feature, and it consists of acts of parliament, understandings and traditional practices that everyone has agreed to follow. So there is a constitution, but it's informal and very much based on tradition and old practices that have been deeply entrenched in the political system. Now, let's go over each of the institutions in detail, starting with elections. Of course, the United Kingdom uses a first-past-the-post system with single-member districts. Interestingly, the MPs do not actually have to live in the districts they represent. And there has been a discussions about the electoral system in the United Kingdom, just as there have been such discussions in Canada. And there was in fact even a referendum on the electoral system recently, driven by the Liberal Democrats. As a third party, they've always been interested in moving away from the first-past-the-post system because, of course, it impacts their electoral chances. So they were more interested in introducing a more proportional system of election, of a more proportional electoral system. but this referendum failed. In terms of voter preferences, the United Kingdom has long been a political culture very much informed by class-based politics, but Thatcher, the start of the Thatcher government kind of offset that. So social class remains a powerful force, but now social scientists talk more about de-alignment instead of realignment. So maybe post-materialist values haven't really gained as much traction in party politics in the United Kingdom as they have elsewhere. But voters will vote against the government rather than for the opposition, as evidenced in the last election when Labour lost power. Looking at the legislature, we have here the Westminster Parliament. It's bicameral. There is the lower house, which is the House of Commons, and this is directly elected. And this is the key to British democracy in the Westminster system. The leader of the biggest party becomes the Prime Minister. The head of the biggest minority party becomes the shadow cabinet. And of course, you'll have backbenchers, and you make your career within this political system, starting as a backbencher and then slowly moving forward until you get a cabinet position, and then you can become a prime minister. So Thatcher's and Brown's career paths are quite typical. The upper house is the House of Lords, 92 of which of the seats are for hereditary memberships, and life seats are used to recognize exemplary service and designated for church officials of the Anglican Church and law lords. This is nowhere near as powerful as the House of Commons. It can delay legislations only for up to 6 months, and that's about the extent of its powers. So if we compare the Westminster Parliament to the American Congress, the Senate of the American Congress, which is the upper house there, is much stronger than the House of Lords, pretty much equally strong to the House of Representatives, whereas in this legislature, the House of Commons is the powerhouse, of course. So this is where the real action happens. Moving on to the executive. The United Kingdom is, of course, a constitutional monarchy. Queen Elizabeth II embodies the authority of the state, and in theory rules in Parliament, but not in practice. This is mostly a symbolic office by now, with ceremonial duties like the speech of the throne and giving royal assent to legislation, which is in practice automatic. The real power here is the Prime Minister, and this is usually the head of the majority party in the House of Commons, and appoints the rest of the cabinet. And there is this doctrine of cabinet responsibility, which means, as I mentioned before, that the government will remain in office until the next election, if and only if it retains the support of Parliament on all major pieces of legislation. I mentioned this before, can't be underestimated, because this is what drives party loyalty, really. The cabinet serves at the behest of the PM and has to answer questions in the House of Commons during question period. That's the check of the democratic, that's the functionality of democratic accountability in the Westminster system is really the question period. And this question period is not so much because the members of parliament might not know what the government's going to answer, but because for the benefit of the voters. It's a way for the opposition to show that there is an alternative to what the current government is doing, and to show to the voters that they are asking pointed questions to the government. Ministers, however, can't know everything their departments do, which brings us to the administration. Senior civil servants here can have long careers in administration and often know much more about the technicalities of the political issues and the department operations than cabinet members do. So there is a tension here. Who is really guiding the agenda? Is it the minister or the senior civil servant who knows the technicalities much better? And there was, in fact, 2 sitcoms exploring this tension and this relationship in the 80s. Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. See them if you haven't. They're absolutely hilarious. Now, finally, some public policy discussion. We can't really discuss public policy in the United Kingdom without talking about the huge policy shift and the reorientation of public policy in the United Kingdom that came about after the 70s. So the 70s, the recession was quite severe in the United Kingdom. You had bankrupt crown corporations, you had an emergency IMF loan in 1976, you had unions bringing effectively the entire country to a standstill, you had martial law, fuel and electricity rationing, you had price and wage controls to the extent that individual ministers would call down to funeral homes to regulate their prices. And into this came Thatcher and confronted the unions in a way that made her very popular with some people and very, 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 very not popular with other people. And she quite changed the dynamics of the public policy. We can't speak about politics in the United Kingdom in the 20th century without talking about Thatcher. It's really a question of pre and post Thatcher. Extensive privatizations of a whole series of crown corporations, cuts to social programs, and these were so encompassing that later when Blair came into office, because of course the Conservatives stayed in power for such a long time after Thatcher took office, that Labour had to do something quite radical to reconstitute themselves and gain electoral success again. So we're talking almost 2 decades of Tory rule when Blair finally produced his alternative to what people saw as outdated Labour politics, and this was called the Third Way, where he argued that he was combining the best of 2 worlds, the best of the markets with the best of social policy. It's the extent to which he actually did this can be debated, and some people have criticized his welfare to work policies, which effectively was a way to force people on welfare to do some form of activity. It could be training programs, it could be work in return for social security, which of course many people see as a social right. But really two key points here in public policy: the Thatcher reforms and Blair's Third Way, that have really defined British politics since 1980, these two. And keep defining British politics. And that was an overview of the political system of the United Kingdom. I hope you found it useful.